Chapter 3. Analyzing the facts. A wise man once said, "Every man has a right to his opinion, but no man has a right to be wrong in his facts." An argument that makes perfect sense if you ask me, because when we start to look at the facts surrounding Nanny and the Maroons, the facts paint a not so flattering portrait of the famed individual and group, leaving them in a light that's actually not so heroic, after all that has been said, believed, and written about them. It must be noted that during all of these human atrocities in the Caribbean and elsewhere, endorsed by the Crown and carried out by Englishmen on the largest of scales, slavery had no legal status in England, as it had no common law or statutory law basis, and as of such, someone could not legally be a slave in England. In 1785, English poet William Cowper wrote, "We have no slaves at home, then why abroad? Slaves cannot breathe in England. If their lungs receive our air, that moment they are free. They touch our country, and their shackles fall. That's noble, and bespeaks a nation proud and jealous of the blessing. Spread it then, and let it circulate through every vein." Not everyone was in agreement with slavery, and with the revolts becoming public knowledge via word of mouth and the print media, the cry to outlaw this practice became louder and louder, eventually causing the governor of Jamaica, in June of 1833, to write a proclamation to the slaves, clarifying their status. By December 1833, there was a bill for the abolition of slavery, and it became effective on August 1, 1834. At that time, all slaves became apprentices and remained working for the same slave masters. The system was an utter failure, and was shortly abolished thereafter, eventually leading to the enslaved receiving their unrestricted freedom on August 1, 1838. The Emancipation Act of 1838 was passed by the British government following an unrelenting abolition campaign, accentuated by bloody slave revolts in the colonies and widespread public outcry against slavery. These are the facts, what happened and how and why it happened, according to our research, which leads to the first real issue I have with Nanny and the Maroons at large. In 1838, slavery was officially abolished in Jamaica, and the Maroon Treaties were signed in 1738 and 1739, an entire century before. These treaties came with land, autonomy, and loyalty to the Crown. They, the Maroons, were commissioned by Lord Treaty to hunt down, capture, and return any runaway slaves, which I am sure were in the thousands over a 100-year span, and I am also sure the Maroons did their job, as evidence has made that clear. So let's do the maths. The English arrived in Jamaica in 1655, and the Maroons resisted them until 1738, a total of 83 years, and then signed treaties that protected them, the Maroons, but aided in the enslavement of their brothers and sisters for another 100 years. These are the facts: 83 years of resistance versus 100 years of working to keep their own enslaved. And with no rebuttal to that fact, my next question is, in reality, how heroic was the Maroon contribution to the freedom of their fellow African and Jamaican brothers and sisters from the chains, leg shackles, and branding irons of British slavery? It must also be noted that they, the Maroons, weren't even vocal or instrumental, in any way, shape, or form, on the road leading to the abolition of slavery. No, they weren't. In the midst of the campaign, which lasted from 1780 until 1838, several individuals became renowned as true anti-slavery champions. Among these notables are the likes of Thomas Clarkson, 1760 to 1846, a founding member of the Committee for the Abolition of the Slave Trade; William Wilberforce, 1759 to 1833, co-founder and leader of the Committee for the Abolition of the Slave Trade; Joseph Sturge, 1793 to 1859, outspoken English Quaker, abolitionist and activist, who founded the British and Foreign Anti-Slavery Society; William Knibb, 1803 to 1845, Baptist missionary; Thomas Burchell, 1799 to 1846, Baptist missionary; Edward Jordan, 1800 to 1869, newspaper editor, statesman, and political activist, who helped galvanize public opinion against slavery in Jamaica among the free mulatto class, using his newspaper The Watchman; and Samuel Sharp, 1801 to 1832, national hero, a Baptist deacon, who is credited as the leader of the 1831 Christmas Rebellion or the Baptist War. so called because most of those involved in the uprising were Baptist by faith, which started on the Kensington estate near Montego Bay. A course of action which is said to have been one of the main contributing factors that escalated the passing of the Abolition Bill in 1833. It was men like these who were some of the main driving forces that lead to the abolition of slavery, with not one Maroon in sight. Note, Kensington Estate is located on the western end of Jamaica, in the parish of St. James, and at the time, would have fallen under the jurisdiction of the Windward Maroons, Maroons of Accompong Town, who, according to historical data, were summoned on the 31st of December, 1832, to help suppress the rebellion, by Sir Willoughby Cotton, 1783, May 4, 1860, commander of the British forces, after the colonial authorities declared martial law. Captain Quayo's Treaty, Clause 15, that the said Captain Quayo, and his people, shall be ready on all commands the Governor, or the Commander-in-Chief for the time being, shall send him, to suppress and destroy all other party or parties of rebellious Negroes, that now are or from time to time gather together to settle in any part of this island, and shall bring in such other Negroes as shall from time to time run away from their respective owners, from the date of these articles. The Christmas Rebellion also included a group known as the Black Regiment, an anti-slave rebel military unit, led by a previously enslaved African, known as Colonel Johnson. It is said that the Black Regiment defeated a unit of local militia on December 28, which led to the activation of the Accompong Town Maroons. It is said that Colonel Johnson's attack was so ferocious and devastating that the militia, which was to protect the plantation owners, had to beat a hasty retreat to Montego Bay, which led to the Black Regiment invading a number of estates, freeing and urging slaves to join them, while burning plantation homes and cane fields along the way. Facts: the treaties between the Maroons and British did not stop or damper the desire for freedom amongst the enslaved. It was an issue before the treaties and continued to be an issue after, right up to the abolition of slavery. From 1740, after the last Maroon Treaty, right up to the abolition of slavery in 1838. Another 98 years, repeated uprisings by enslaved people in Jamaica threatened to overthrow the white power structure of the island, presenting one of the most serious threats to the British Empire prior to the American Revolution. The enslaved from the Gold Coast, modern-day Ghana, Akan, Ashanti and Coromantee, were often at the forefront of slave revolts in Jamaica during the 17th and 18th centuries. In 1673, in the parish of St. Anne, about 300 slaves revolted. 17 years later, in the parish of Clarendon, over 400 Coromantee burned down Sutton's estate and fled to the hills. In 1745, Accan-born slaves were said to have also revolted in the southeastern parish of St. Thomas. However, St. Mary, a location at the time of many new sprawling plantations, would eventually become the stage for one of the major historical uprisings around that time. It is reported that in 1760, following 20 years of relative peace under treaties between the British and the Maroons, according to plantation owners, things took a turn for the worst when a slave revolt took the lives of 60 white colonists and damaged several properties across the northern and western parts of Jamaica. The uprising broke out on Tuesday, April 8, 1760, when revolters, believed to comprise of Africans from the Gold Coast, numbering in the hundreds, most of who were newly imported, and led by a Coromantee slave known as Taki, a name which has since become synonymous with the struggle against enslavement on the island of Jamaica, decided to break the status quo. Coromantins, Coromantee or Coromantine is an English language term that was for enslaved people from the Akan ethnic group, who were taken from the Gold Coast region in modern-day Ghana. Taki's revolt. With the element of surprise in their benefit, along with the speed of their initial assault, Taki's revolt started with great success, and with achieved and bolstered by their initial easy success, it is said that the runaways went on a rampage, even overpowering the British forces stationed at Fort Haldane, located near St. Mary's capital of Port Maria, with literal ease. Upon arrival, reports claim that Taki and his compatriots made their way to the storeroom where they obtained arms and ammunition, after killing the storekeeper of the armory almost immediately. Taki and his men commandeered nearly 4 barrels of gunpowder and 40 firearms, before marching on to overrun plantations at Hayward Hall, which was in close proximity to Port Maria, and Isha, located in Belfield, also in St. Mary. Esher Estate, St. Mary, exploded in rebellion once Taki's forces drew near, and was left in ruins in the aftermath, leaving William Beckford, vowing revenge. Esher Estate was owned by the then wealthy William Beckford, December 19, 1709 to June 21, 1770. A well-known political figure in 18th century London, whose vast wealth came largely from his plantations in Jamaica and the large numbers of enslaved Africans working for him and his family. Beckford owned 13 sugar plantations in Jamaica and owned approximately 3,000 enslaved Africans, most of who rebelled and joined Taki's forces. Note, Fort Haldane was and still is located near Port Maria in the parish of St. Mary, and was erected in 1759, and named after General George Haldane, then governor of Jamaica. It was constructed to protect the harbour of Port Maria from Spanish raids, and was later used as a regimental base to keep the enslaved and working classes of St. Mary under control. By dawn the following morning, now 100 strong, Taki and his growing force had fought their way inland, capturing estates and killing European settlers and plantation owners, wherever they found them. With so much blood and carnage, the plantation owners were livid, even though in contrast to the 60 recorded deaths which they incurred. It is also recorded that more than 500 black men and women were killed during the fighting and the bloody aftermath that followed. Oral accounts claim that the rebels stopped to rejoice in their success at Ballard's Valley, where a slave from Esher decided to slip away and sound the alarm, which is said to have led to Obeah men, witch doctors, quickly encircling the camp and dispensing a powder that they claimed would protect Taki and his men from injury in battle. Unknown to them, by April 9th, Lieutenant Governor Sir Henry Moore, 1st Baronet, had dispatched a detachment of mounted militia from the 74th Regiment from Spanish Town to St. Mary. The British soldiers were joined by Maroons from Moore and Charlestown and Scots Hall, who were bound by treaty to suppress such rebellions. The Maroon contingents were commanded by Moore Town's white superintendent Charles Swiggle, and comprised of Maroon officers, Clash and Sambo from Moore Town, Quaco and Kane from Charlestown, and Cujo and Davy, the Maroon sharpshooter from Scots Hall. Taki's War is said to have been the most significant slave uprising in the Caribbean between the one on St. John and St. John, United States Virgin Islands, on November 23, 1733, and the Haitian Revolution, which started in 1791. According to Professor Trevor Bernard, who is considered a specialist in the history of slavery in the Atlantic world, in terms of its shock to the imperial system, only the American Revolution surpassed Taki's War in the 18th century. It was the most dangerous slave rebellion in the British Empire until the Baptist War of Samuel Sharp in 1831–32, which also occurred in Jamaica. Special note: records show that the St. John, United States Virgin Islands insurrection started when it is said approximately 150 African slaves from Akwamu, present-day Ghana, revolted against the owners and overseers of the plantations. This revolt was said to have been led by Brefu, an enslaved woman from Ghana, who later killed herself alongside 23 other revolters, in order to evade capture as the rebellion weakened in 1734. This rebellion was one of the earliest and longest slave revolts in the Americas at the time. According to oral history, the Akwamu slaves took control of most of the island, with the intention to resume crop production under their own control and use Africans of other tribes as slave labor. The plantation owners, however, regained control of the situation by the end of May 1734, after the Akwamu were overpowered by several hundred better-armed French and Swiss troops, who had been sent in from the Martinique colonial militia for the sole purpose of hunting down Maroons, which they did, until quelling the remaining fibers of the rebellion in August of 1734. Taki's plan seemed to have ran along similar lines as Brefu's, because ambitious as it may have sounded for the times, Taki and his lieutenant's plan was to take Jamaica from the British and create a black utopia. Interestingly enough, the uprising was said to have been inspired by the success of the Maroons throughout the sustained Maroon War of 1728 to 1740, the same Maroons who would later be credited for his death. We know not when Taki was born, but we know when he died, and with him allegedly being a newly imported slave, and taking the average age for slaves that were imported into the island, it is almost safe to assume that Taki may not have been around at the time of said war, which was said to have been his inspiration. His revolt, Taki's, was 20 years after the Maroon War ended, so even if he was 30 at the time of his revolt, his knowledge of these occurrences was more than likely of a second-hand nature. Important note, the war between the British and Maroons did not start until 1728, and the British arrived on the island of Jamaica in 1655, a span of 73 years. So regardless of what happened during that time, the point is, the British and the Maroons, coexisted on the island for 73 years before going to war. Before being a slave, Taki was said to have been a king or leader of some sort in his village. It is said that he himself recalled selling his rivals of the Ashanti, Nzema, and Ahanta tribes off into slavery as spoils of war to the British. But ironically, he would later become a slave himself, when a rival state defeated his army in battle and sold him into slavery, which eventually led to his arrival in Jamaica. Many historians agree that the slave revolt of 1760 was a coordinated island-wide conspiracy, led by a secret network of Akan, Coromantee, slaves. According to historical accounts, sometime before daybreak on Easter Monday, April 7, 1760, Taki and his followers initiated the revolt, and from all accounts, easily took over both the Frontier and Trinity plantations, killing many of the white overseers in the wake of their wrath.